level below 5.7, and if it's above 5.7, it means that you've got a lower quality and you've also got variation in that quality. You can't guarantee when you're putting a branded product that it's always going to hit the same parameters or parameters when you're eating it. Same situation happens across the species. I know MSA we predominantly do for beef and in some cases sheep meat, but it also happens in pork as well, where you end up with this dry firm meat if it's above 6, or pale soft meat if it's below 5.2. Right, let's go through. There we go. Monitor pH too is because pH has an effect on the meat colour. This is what we call the meat colour triangle, where you have deoxygenated miniature blood cells or part of the blood cell, and you go through the different colours of either a purple, and you just cut the meat through to an oxygenated colour, which is where we want it to be. If it's left out for too long, you can end up with the brown colour. And all of these interactions in the colour triangle are affected by both pH and temperature of the meat. So it's really important that we understand the pH to be able to affect that meat colour. And this table makes it even clearer around colour stability and why it's important to ensure that we understand that pH to make sure we get the right meat colour that we're looking for. So allows us to have that normal meat colour and a normal within the colour spectrum. We've worked out what a normal pH is. We know what a normal pH decline is. So that during the slaughter process of how we get to a normal pH. The normal pH for a pH for pork. And when you measure one of these, you start with the first measurement as stops, that very first point, and that only sits up in its high region of 6.7 as a pH, and over roughly a period you then get a levelling off. Because this happens through conversion to lactic acid, it means it's done through an enzyme base. So if the temperature is changed, that can then change how this fall occurs to control the decline. Most, if not all of your processing plants will have done this initially when you set up your MSA and done normal grading. Decline set. And what is important to understand in these declines is if it happens too quickly, there's effects, and if it happens too slowly, there's effects. And we talk about a pH temperature window. With that relationship between pH declining and the temperature of the meat declining. Each window is the optimum parameters of pH and temperature to ensure the best eating quality of the product. It's important for us to monitor this so that we can ensure that all the things that can change that pH decline, which we'll go into in a minute, where how they affect that window and you're meeting that window. If you choose to just do a pH at the end or look at your MSA pH results on product, that unfortunately doesn't give you any indication of how that fall happened, which means that you would be affecting the pH temperature decline, not going through that window to get that optimal equality despite hitting the right parameters with your the pH. So what is the actual pH window? It's at of 6 pH, level 6 pH 6, which is actually when the animal is hitting rigor mortis. That rigor mortis is known as when the animal used all of its energy or glycogen reserves and no longer producing anabolic function. So, window, dependent on the species we're talking about, has different temperature ranges. Further through the process, I've got those for both beef, sheep, and I think I've got pork meat ones in there. So, what's that window for us? We've got the optimum eating quality. One is, I mentioned at the beginning that the pH declines from the normal body pH of 7 down to a 5.3 or a 5.7. It reduces down because of the metabolic process of producing lactic acid. That happens on the amount of glycogen that's in cells. So the glycogen is the one that's being converted to lactic acid. So we talk about a glycogen bucket, and each of the cells has a glycogen bucket in it, and this can be changed either through the producer or through factors during processing. What goes in the bucket to begin with can be affected by the producers in the nutrition that the animals are getting, the amount and the quality of feed. The size of the bucket can be potentially changed through the animal's genetic makeup, which is something that we don't know a lot about at the moment. But the whole of the bucket that you can see are dependent on stresses to the animal. So when we stress ourselves or when we stress animals, your body has that reason to start using that energy, which actually reduces the amount of glycogen that's available during the slaughter process. So both transport, stress, handling stress, and even climatic stress during the holding preload or during transport can affect the amount of glycogen that's available to be converted into lactic acid to allow us to drop that pH. Surprisingly, because stress is such a big factor, MSA provides guidance on or provide specific requirements from the producer end and also provides recommendations in dispatch of the animals and leading up to that. So the 2 weeks pre-slaughter are a factor in ensuring that the volume of glycogen that needs to be there for eating quality is available. So the requirements around dispatch that NSA has, to have animals on property for a minimum of 30 days prior to dispatch, to ensure that you're not loading animals with a poor temperament, because obviously they cause problems, but also stress other animals out. Ensure that there's no sick or injured animals there, and all of those requirements are also in the fit to load guidelines that they put out. Also add on some recommendations around the animals in a single mob for days prior to slaughter. Ensure that the sections are good for the 30 days prior to dispatch, and the mustering and the handling of the animals in the yards, ability of water, and making sure you've got the appropriate stocking density. So clicking back and forth. And it also provides a range of information throughout processing. It's specifically worded around sheep, however, it applies to all species really, and a lot of this is captured in the animal welfare standards. So there is a relationship there between eating quality and animal welfare. Through a few of these, we've got receival, where the good of the truck, which I do understand some of you will be in control of that and some of you won't, depending on how you receive animals. The handling of the animals off the transport, the handling of the animals in the yards, minimising electrodes and dog use that can stress the animals, and keeping animals in their group that they've been transported in, to ensure that you don't add extra stress. Also ensuring that you're using the correct ramps and facilities when you're loading them and moving them through the yard. So, as making sure that the yard well drained and there's shelter there for them, and that we've already mentioned that there's trained handlers on receival of the animals, and that there's clean water available for them. So in moving animals through the yard, we gave in the animal welfare standards, but those no sharp corners or options to stop, make them stop, or try and avoid areas. Not only does that affect the animal stress and the pH and therefore the eating quality, but also prevent bruising of the animals. And there's more information there around non-slip floors, ramps and stairs, and making sure that they have a surface that they can actually walk on. So smooth surfaces where you get slips and falls. Then recommendations around training, ensuring the person is trained properly, ensuring that the restraints are well designed, and and you provide an effective stun and isn't delayed to allow the animal to get stressed. I also recommend that you monitor the areas. If you are in that industry standard and being audited by OSME, you will already be monitoring a lot of them. But it's also nice to put, I suppose, pieces of the puzzle together around meat quality. So if you're regularly monitoring these areas around the concept and the time that they're arriving and their transport time and transporter and unloading and how easily the animals move through the pens and up the ramps to slaughter and the slaughter times and stun intervals. The last one on there is your pH to decline monitoring. I'm not sure how regularly you all do that, because I do understand that it's not an easy process to go through. But you need to get an idea of how those front-end steps can change that decline or change the pH of animal at slaughter. So other areas that affects the pH is electrical stimulation, because if you stimulate or electrically stimulate the cells, it encourages them to do the conversion from glycogen to lactic acid quicker. So this can help us, because we know that if we're trying to make that fall quicker, we know how that works, and we can drop the muscle pH quicker. Or has electrostimulation can have the variabilities of how long you apply the time for, whether you've got the right magnitude and wavelength, and that your equipment is calibrated properly so that you're aware of how much electrical stimulation you're actually applying. So in a 2-needed presentation for MinTrack on calibration of electrical stimulators, which will be back in a presentation on MinTrack. She did that a couple of years ago at the network meeting. And it's surprising to see how many of the electrical stimulators have been put in place, but fortunately not checked regularly enough to ensure the quality of or consistency even of what was being applied to carcasses. The MSA requirement is that once you do your pH temperature decline monitoring, and you will have done to start doing grading, is that if you're going to be applying an electrical stimulation, do an additional monitor based on that stimulus you're using. And you'll see this graph that because you applied the electrical stimulation, you've pretty much just dropped down high purely through stimulation of the cells to ensure your glycogen converts to lactic acid quicker, and then it tails off. It does mean that you can change your temperature window, as you can see, that you've got, sorry, let's get the cursor up, you've got a temperature we've used stimulation of 18, which is ideal, whereas previously it was 8, which is too low. So that allows you to make those variations get a better eating quality. Forms of electrical stimulation or electrical input that we use in the mobilizers. So when you use it on your cradle or straight stunning to prevent those animals that do a lot of involuntary kicking action. Because that is straight after stunning, it does mean that you get a fairly rapid decline in pH. And the other one being used is the rigidity probes around hide pullers, which does say that whatever stimulation you're using is consistent. So that will be considered when you're using those immunizations because of the vein using them. If you're only using them on animals, there's a lot of involuntary kicking, you're then changing the level of them. So the other area, as we keep on talking about, is pH and temperature. So not surprisingly, temperature can affect that pH. Happen because of the season. If it's hotter, hotter floor to floor, you can end up with a quicker decline. If it's gone on the floor to floor, you can end up with a shorter, slow decline. And that way you may, or some way, can choose to decrease the amount of electrical stimulation that they use during summer to counteract that seasonality in temperature. Again, that's another reason for us to do more of those monitoring of the decline to ensure that you're taking into account that seasonality. The other area is processing time, which is also to do with the temperature more than the processing time. Obviously, if you're not processing the animal as quickly and getting it into the chillers as quickly, you're not reducing that temperature as quickly. You can change your pH temperature window of whether you're meeting it. And not surprising, killing cycles. It can be affected based on the carcass weight or the fat cover of the animal. The temperature of the animal won't reduce as much or as quickly if the animal is heavier and fat and has more of a cover on it, which means that you've got a slower decline. You could get here a seasonal effect to do with the animal's nutrition. So going back to our glycogen buckets, the animal's coming in with a higher glycogen because they're getting a better nutrition base. That means that it can, with the pH decline going because you've ended up with more glycogen to be converted into lactic acid to reduce the pH. So I've got cycles written in there as a point. Most of what we do for food safety and ensure that we get the temperatures down to the requirements within the required time prevent microbiological growth on the product. It's to try and manipulate other parameters that we've been talking about and trying to change the chill cycles in any way. But one thing that can be done a lot easier if you're finding that you've got higher pHs is that you loading your chillers and you provide more space around carcasses to allow temperature to decline quicker. So we've talked about pH, the pH temperature window, and the factors that can change to affect that and affect the decline of pH. But what happens is the pH falls too slowly. So if it falls too slowly, we get shortening, we get tougher meats, and a dark colour. Because 7 or pH at rigor mortis that we're looking at in that window is at lower temperature. Still got action in the muscles, which means the muscles go into a cold shock, but it means they contract. So if you've normally got a cell that looks like this, with 2 different fibers, muscle cell, the muscle cell will contract, make the fibers overlay themselves, and you are with a tougher piece of meat when you're eating it. Okay. So, shortening, as I just said, causes the muscles to be tougher, and it can increase toughness by fourfold. It can be influenced by the chilling regime, so carcasses that chill quicker can cause shortening. Individual muscles even within the carcass, so nearer to the surface that chill quicker, can cause shortening. And they are very rarely seen because of the electrical stimulation that we do. Because we drop that pH temperature decline so much at the beginning, we end up with coming as often because we've used up all of the glycogen in the cells so quickly. So if the pH in the cell too high, it's not cutting. So you've got dark colour, you've got tougher meat, and takes longer to cook, and it reduces the shelf life. So just the point is that if you look at food safety from, you've got the microbial loading on the product, if we chill it down, it stops the microbes from growing so much, and you end a lower microbial count on the product because you've stopped their growth curve. But also, if the product hits the right parameters, it's got a lower pH, which is also more acidic. And that more acidic product, though it's only slight, and we're talking 0.2, 0.3 of pH scale, it means that with the product having a reduced microbial growth for pH. So when you process things like salami, they purposefully ensure that the pH is lower and it's more acidic to ensure a longer shelf life on them. And it's no different. If we end up with a higher pH, it encourages that microbial growth, means you end up with a reduced shelf life on your product. So what happens if the pH falls too weak? With that being, or the pH hitting the rise at a higher temperature, and the muscle proteins denature, and that causes toughness in the meat. You end up with a soft, pale, exudative product because you've denatured the cells, and you end up with a more water holding capacity in the meat, which means you get more whipping and dripping of the meat when packaging or in packaging. You end up with two-tone in some of the cuts, cell variation, and it also means that you can't the product because the enzymes that help the meat to become more tender with aging are denatured. Here is the graph that I think best describes cold shortening and heat shortening. So we talked about cold shortening, get the declining pH relative to temperature slowly, results in us ending up with a pH that's higher than we expect. And then if that decline too quickly, we end up with a pH that's lower than we expect. This is our pH. It is set for cattle from 30 degrees down to 15 degrees, with the ideal between 30 to 25 degrees temperature when we hit that 6 in age. Found though with these, the animal comes in with a set amount of glycogen, which fits how far that pH can change, and only vary it to a small extent. This graph most likely gives a variation that's a lot bigger than what's actually possible, bearing in mind how the cells as they're going through. Because if you have enough glycogen to begin with, that up with a higher pH in your dark cutting, and ensure that you're doing everything that's possible to hit this green curve to get the ideal outcome for that single piece of meat. Okay, so the parameters for sheep vary slightly dependent on how you hang the carcasses and how long you're going to hang them for. So then here, temperature window that you're trying to hit, dependent on that ages, the number of your aging or the different techniques. And this one shows us putting information we just learned about shortening and heat shortening onto our time of slaughter. If you've got a quick line, hitting your pH at higher temperature. So you end up with the heat shortening effect, whereas if you end up with a lower decline and a low pH, you'll end up with that cold shortening effect and a high pH overall. So what can affect our pH and what can affect our pH to window? We've gone through the input, so what the animal needs when it comes in, how it's been handled before it gets there, and also, as I put here, be on an individual basis. We do a very good job of seeing a herd the same way and expecting all the herd to act the same way and the meat to come out of that herd exactly the same. And that's unfortunately not the reality of biology. If we sat to get the same meat, we can that some of us would put weight on and some of us would reduce weight and some of us would put muscle mass on and some of us would put fat on. And it's the same in a mob of cattle or a mob of sheep or in a processing line of pigs. That's that individual animal variation that means that you always, to some extent, have an animal that's more stressed or an animal that has a smaller glycogen bucket to be filled or actually manages to have a variation in the amount of glycogen in their cells before they can eat as much. The other variables are the glycogen output, so the stress and handling of the animals in bus and at stunning, electrical stimulation, and then the temperature process as we go through, whether that's the overall time of processing, the temperature of the slaughter floor, or chilling temperatures that we use. So MSA grading, we mentioned MSA going through the presentation because they have recommendations for both the producer and the processors, and they have requirements from you around monitoring that pH temperature decline curve. Obviously, at the end of the process, they do their MSA grading, and we're looking for pH that's below 5.71 to classify as MSA, and at a temperature that's less than 12 degrees. And right back at the beginning, you're all colour. So MSA grades against colour, but we get that colour influenced by the pH in the meat. Okay. And this just gives you the areas of non-conformance for MSA grading, which may make a bit more sense given the presentation we've gone through. So the fat cover, we talked about that in the carcasses coming through and being chilled and how the temperature can vary based on the fat cover. Obviously about pH, and without meat colour. And then there's around bruising and chestnut parameters and hide paw damage. So just to get all into a bit of a broader context, in 2015, there was an audit of beef eating quality, looking at how well both producers and processors were meeting the MSA grading results. And of those producers that were in A and the processors that were in MSA, they looked at over 3.2 million cattle in this case, and they looked at 42 processors. 93% of carcasses met the MSA minimum requirement. The main reasons for compliance were around dark cutting or dark colour and pH level, which is from graph is big from the next one down, which was rib level. So it does just show us why pH is important through the process. So now these are my questions for you guys, because hopefully you've been paying attention as Rachel's been putting up different bits, and hopefully you've been paying attention to different areas of the presentation. I'd like you to hopefully provide me some answers. So would pH levels be inconsistent between animals in a herd? Everyone can take their phones off mute now and answer my questions, hopefully.
Inconsistency in glycogen levels within the mob.
Does anyone else have any other suggestions?
For the chillers, the going in at night are obviously going into an empty chiller. They're going to cool quicker, and it's not at the end of the chiller's full.
Yep. Does anyone have any other suggestions, and then I'll give you the answers?
Just all the animals, so how they're treated during slaughter, probably, on the floor.
Yep, perfect.
The usage of immobilizers in the cradle, whether they're all immobilized or not.
Really good answers. So I think we got a variation in the glycogen level, which was, they all mentioned between herd, you'll get a variation. And then, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure who mentioned the stressing of the animal. And get a variation if there's a difference in processing time, so whether an animal's been out on the retain rail, or if there's a break during the kill, whether that's a breakdown or you run your chain off during the kill, for whether, as someone mentioned, whether those animals go to the chiller for longer than the carcasses that follow. You also mentioned, I think, body splitting, if when you're putting them into your chillers, you're grading them out on consistency joining room. They could be putting subs or into different chillers, and then you'll get a different chill potentially, which can get variation. Some of the inconsistency in stimulation as well. Different bodies as well. And then if you've got bodies touching each other during the chiller, they've got enough space to get that temperature reduction. So I think really well with that one, we've got most of the answers. So the next one is, why could heat shrinking happen? I do understand that heat shortening and cold shortening can get a bit confusing. So the heat shortening is when you've got that rapid decline pH vertically. So rapid decline in pH. It could be because your electrical stimulation is too high, so you're using all the glycogen so quickly at the beginning because you're too much stimulation. There could be a variation in the temperature, which means that temperature stays higher for a bit longer than you'd expect, and you get that decline too quickly to a breakdown. If the chillers are cold, you're still keeping that temperature high, or if fat coverage on the carcass is weak, you're still keeping that temperature high, which means you get the transfer acid quicker, which means you get that pH dropping quicker. Bit of that. What could cold shortening happen?
And cold before pH has reached 6.
So,
When got smaller.
so no, you can keep going. Because this would go over more than one page, so they're not on there. Yeah, so if you've got, we say, varying glycogen levels and there's not as much glycogen in the cells, you'll end up with the pH not dropping as much as you expect. And variation in body size in the chillers. So if the body can chill quicker, which I think is what someone mentioned, it means that you get the drop in the temperature before the pH is reached where it needs to be. But if the bottom there of the carcass being placed in the direct path of a chill gun, it's obviously going to be chilled quicker than what aren't. The chill cold, I think, was mentioned too. And then again, there's not enough fat cover. The opposite of everything we've said for heat shortening, which does show to us that we're trying to find that balance between the two, and this I don't think is very easy in anything. So unless we measure everything, it's quite difficult for us to reach that balance. And my last question is food safety counterintuitive pH or meat quality? What do we do for food safety reasons that can affect pH and end up with us not actually getting the results we want?
The cold shortening.
Excellent. Because you already talked about, you can end up putting temperature too low or chilling down too quickly. If you're doing the right thing from a food safety perspective to reduce your temperature and microbial growth, but that will result in you not getting the pH and the meat quality you're looking for. So, these are references that I'll ask Rachel to send out to you, which is where we've got all the information from, in case anybody wants more information. And does anyone have any questions?
Oh, thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thanks everyone for joining in. Hopefully you all heard everything and learned something, which is what we're trying to achieve. I will send a recording out to anybody if you want it, and it'll also be put up on the AMPC website somewhere. They're trying to figure out where the best place is to put that. But if you do have any more information, please, or if you would like more information, please either email me or email Elizabeth. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any other questions that you might have after this. Yeah, anybody to say something, please feel free to do so now. Otherwise, I'll end this. And we appreciate it if you could also fill out the survey too. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's all